The alien queen pointed at me, and the universe began falling apart. Part 1. Jake Morrison never wanted to be a diplomat. He was a pilot. He liked flying ships through the black emptiness of space. He liked the quiet hum of engines and the cold light of distant stars. But the United Earth government needed every human they could find for the big meeting on Station Nexus 7. So Jake got pulled from his normal duties and stuffed into a formal uniform that made him feel like a dressed-up mannequin. Station Nexus 7 was the largest space station ever built. It floated in neutral space, far from any planet or star system that belonged to any single species. 43 different alien races had sent their representatives here. The reason was simple. The Kethrani Dominion was crowning a new queen, and everyone wanted to watch. The Kethrani were old. Very old. Their empire had existed for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. They were tall beings, almost 9 feet high, with bodies covered in scales that changed color based on their mood. They had 4 arms and moved with a grace that made humans look clumsy and awkward. Jake stood in the far corner of the massive observation hall with the rest of the small human group. Dr. Claire Bennett was next to him. She was a language expert who had spent years learning how the Kethrani talked and acted. On his other side was Captain Owen Hughes, who led their little team and looked just as uncomfortable as Jake felt. "Stop scratching," Claire whispered to Jake. "This uniform itches," Jake whispered back. "Everyone is watching. Try to look professional." Jake tried. He really did. But the hall was filled with the strangest beings he had ever seen. The Vreth were giant insects with clicking mouths and too many legs. The Yemnari were clouds of glowing gas floating in special containers. The Krendathi looked like walking mountains made of rock, and they moved so slowly that Jake was not sure they were alive at first thought. The ceremony began with music that did not sound like music to human ears. It was a mix of tones and vibrations that made Jake's teeth hurt. Then came speeches in languages he could not understand, even with the translation device in his ear. The device kept saying things like untranslatable concept and no human equivalent. Finally, Queen Velthara entered the hall. She was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Jake had ever seen. Her scales were deep violet and gold, glowing with an inner light. Her 4 arms moved like flowing water. Her eyes were large and amber-colored, and they seemed to see everything at once. She walked to the crystalline throne at the center of the hall and sat down, and every being in the room held their breath. More rituals followed. Jake lost track of what was happening. He was too busy looking at the aliens around him, wondering what they thought of humans. Wondering if they saw his species as equals or as children who had only just learned to walk among the stars. Then something changed. Queen Velthara stood up from her throne. All 4 of her arms spread wide in a gesture that Claire had told him meant she was about to make an important announcement. The hall went completely silent. Thousands of beings waited to hear what the new queen would say. Her great amber eyes moved across the crowd. They passed over diplomats and leaders who had traveled for years to be here. They passed over the most powerful beings in the known universe, and then they stopped. Jake. He felt her gaze like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. Her scales changed to a color he had never seen before. It was not violet or gold or any normal color. It was something else, something that hurt to look at. Something that made his brain feel like it was trying to understand a word in a language that did not exist. She raised one trembling arm and pointed directly at him. When she spoke, her voice filled every corner of the vast hall. The translation device in Jake's ear gave him the words, and those words made no sense at all. "The Harbinger has come, the one who walks between the broken places. The universe remembers what was, and it trembles at what must be." Every eye in the hall turned to look at Jake. Thousands of alien faces stared at him. Some showed fear. Some showed wonder. Some showed emotions he could not even begin to understand. Jake looked at Claire. Her face had gone pale white. He looked at Captain Hughes. The man seemed frozen, unable to move or speak. He looked down at himself. He was just Jake Morrison, a pilot from a small town in Ohio, a normal human being in a fancy uniform that itched. "I think there has been some mistake," he said. His voice sounded small and weak in the huge hall. The Queen's scales pulsed with that impossible color. "There is no mistake, child of Earth. You carry the wound in your soul. The wound that was made before time began. The wound that is beginning to bleed again." At that exact moment, the lights went out. Not just the artificial lights in the station. The stars visible through the giant windows also went dark. For one terrible second, there was nothing but pure blackness. And in that blackness, Jake saw something. He saw the universe itself. Not as a place with stars and planets, but as a piece of fabric. Old fabric, worn thin in places. He saw tears and holes that had been sewn shut long ago. He saw new tears starting to form, the threads pulling apart, the darkness behind them pushing through. He saw that something was very wrong with reality itself. Then the lights came back. The stars returned to their normal brightness. But Jake knew that what he had seen was real. He knew it in his bones, in his blood, in some deep part of himself that he had never known existed. The hall exploded into chaos. Aliens shouted and screamed in 100 different languages. Guards rushed forward. Diplomats demanded explanations. The translation device in Jake's ear gave up trying to keep pace with all the noise. Queen Velthar remained calm. She sat back on her throne and watched Jake with those huge amber eyes. There was something in her gaze that might have been pity, or might have been hope. "The unraveling begins," she said, and somehow her voice cut through all the noise. "The Harbinger must choose, to mend or to break, to save or to destroy. The fate of all existence rests on the child of Earth." Jake wanted to run. He wanted to hide. He wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find himself back on his ship, doing his normal job, living his normal life. But he could not run. He could not hide, because something inside him had woken up, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. And that something told him that the Queen was right. The universe was falling apart. And somehow, for reasons he did not yet understand, he was the only one who could stop it. Captain Hughes finally found his voice. "Get Morrison back to the ship, now." Guards moved. Hands grabbed Jake's arms. The crowd parted as they pushed through. But the whole time, Jake felt the Queen's eyes on his back. The whole time, he felt that new thing inside him growing stronger. His life as a simple pilot was over. Whatever came next would be something completely different, something that would change everything. The alien queen pointed at me, and the universe began falling apart. 2-3 days after the Queen pointed at him, Jake sat in a small room on the ESS Dauntless, the newest and best ship in the human fleet. He had not slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that vision again. The fabric of the universe. The tears. The darkness pushing through. Dr. Claire Bennett sat across from him with data tablets spread all over the table. She had been reading old texts and ancient records from a dozen different alien cultures. She looked almost as tired as Jake felt. "I found something," she said. "The Kithrani have a word for what the Queen called you. Veth-ul-Kri. It means the one who remembers the before. The before what?" Jake asked. "Before everything. Before the universe was the way it is now." Claire pushed a tablet toward him. The screen showed strange symbols he could not read. According to their oldest stories, reality was not always stable. A long time ago, longer than we can even imagine, there was a war. Not a war between planets or empires. A war between beings so powerful they could change the rules of existence itself. Jake rubbed his eyes. This sounds like a fairy tale. Maybe, but the Vreth have similar stories. So do the Yumnari. So do almost every species that has been in space long enough to collect ancient records. Claire leaned forward. They all talk about the same thing. A great breaking. A sundering. Reality itself was damaged, and it had to be rebuilt. But the rebuild was not perfect. Some wounds remained. And the Queen thinks I am connected to these wounds. She thinks you carry a piece of the old reality. A fragment of what existed before the breaking. It has been passed down through human genes for thousands of years, sleeping, waiting. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. I grew up on a farm. My biggest worry used to be whether the rain would come on time for the crops. Now you're telling me I have some ancient cosmic power inside me. Before Claire could answer, Captain Hughes walked into the room. His face was grim. We have a problem, he said. Long-range sensors picked up something strange in the Kepler 442 system. Space itself is coming apart. He activated the holographic display in the center of the room. An image appeared, showing a star system far from Earth. But something was wrong with it. At the center, where a normal star should have been, there was a wound. A tear in reality itself. It glowed with colors that hurt to look at, and the planets around it were slowly being ripped to pieces. The Kethrani are calling it a Vethelgar, Claire said quietly. A bleeding wound. They say it is connected to the original breaking. One of the old tiers is opening again. Jake stared at the image. Deep inside his chest, he felt something stir. It was like homesickness, but for a place he had never been. Like grief for something he had never lost. The feeling grew stronger as he watched the wound pulse and grow. I can feel it, he said. I do not know how, but I can feel it calling to me. Queen Velthara arrived on the Dauntless later that day. She brought 5 Kethrani scholars with her, old beings whose scales had faded to pale silver with age. They moved slowly, but their eyes were sharp and full of knowledge. The Queen stood in the meeting room, looking at Jake with those huge amber eyes. Her scales were muted now, a calm blue that Claire said meant deep thinking. You must understand what you are, the Queen said. Her voice was softer than it had been in the Great Hall, almost gentle. Long before your species existed, long before many of the stars you see were born, the universe was different. The laws that govern everything were not fixed. They changed and shifted like water in a river. She waved one of her 4 arms, and her scholars activated a complex holographic display. Jake saw something his mind struggled to understand. It was a picture of reality itself, shown as patterns of light and shadow, threads weaving together to form the fabric of existence. There were beings who lived in that old reality, the Queen continued. Not gods, not in any way your religions would understand, but creatures of great power who could shape existence according to their will. They fought a war so vast and terrible that the very idea of war is just an echo of it. And when the war ended, Jake asked, reality was broken, shattered into pieces. The universe, you know, with its steady laws and predictable physics, was built on the ruins of what came before. But the builders could not fix everything. Some wounds were too deep. Some pieces of the old reality remained, scattered across time and space. One of the old scholars spoke up. You carry such a piece. It attached itself to your genetic line long ago, before your species even developed language. It has been sleeping, waiting for the time when it would be needed. And now the wounds are opening again, Jake said. The Queen nodded. Yes, the repairs that were made are failing. The tears are growing. If nothing is done, the universe will unravel completely. Everything that exists will be unmade. Jake felt the thing inside him pulse. It was stronger now, more awake. It showed him glimpses of what the Queen was describing. Visions of the ancient war. Visions of beings made of pure thought fighting across dimensions that no longer existed. Visions of the desperate measures taken to save something from the destruction. What am I supposed to do? He asked. You must learn to use the power of the old reality to mend the wounds, the Queen said. In the ancient texts, there are two possibilities for beings like you. Either you will learn to heal what is broken, or the wounds will consume you and grow larger. There is no middle path. Claire put her hand on Jake's arm. You do not have to face this alone. We will help you. Can you? Jake asked. Can anyone help with something like this? The Queen's scales shifted to a warmer color. The child of Earth asks the right question. No, we cannot do what you must do, but we can support you, guide you, keep you connected to the reality you are trying to save. The Dauntless changed course for Kepler 442 during the journey. Jake worked with Claire and the Kathrani scholars to understand his new abilities. He learned that the fragment inside him was not truly part of him. It was more like a passenger, something that had hitched a ride on his genetic line and had been waiting for this moment. He learned that there had been others like him. In other species, on other worlds, throughout history, most of them had failed. The power of the old reality was dangerous. It could drive a person mad. It could consume them completely. It could turn them into something that was no longer alive in any meaningful sense. But some had succeeded. Some had learned to use the power to mend wounds, to repair damage, to hold reality together when it threatened to fall apart. Jake practiced reaching inside himself, touching the fragment, feeling its alien power. It was like learning to use a muscle he never knew he had. At first, he could barely sense it. Then he could feel it clearly. Then he could make it respond to his will. The first time he used the power consciously, he healed a small crack in the ship's hull. He did not touch it with his hands. He reached out with something else, something that was not quite his mind and not quite his body. He felt the metal, understood its structure, and pushed it back together. Claire watched with wide eyes. That was amazing. It felt strange, Jake said. Like I was the metal for a moment. Like I was everything. That is how the old ones saw reality, one of the scholars said. Not as separate things, but as one connected whole. The fragment is teaching you to see the way they saw. As the Dauntless drew closer to Kepler 442, the feeling in Jake's chest grew stronger. The wound was calling to him. The old reality was reaching out to its lost piece, wanting to be whole again. Jake stood at the observation window and watched the stars slide past. He thought about his home in Ohio. He thought about his parents, who had no idea their son was about to try to repair a tear in the fabric of existence. He thought about all the normal things he would never do again. Then he thought about what would happen if he failed. Not just to him, but to everyone. To Earth, to every planet and every species and every living thing in the universe. He could not fail. He would not fail. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would learn to mend the wounds. The universe was falling apart. And somehow, a farm boy from Ohio was the only one who could stop it. The alien queen pointed at me, and the universe began falling apart. The Kepler 442 system was dying. Jake stood on the observation deck of the Dauntless and watched reality tear itself apart. The wound at the heart of the system was huge, millions of miles across. It pulsed with colors that made his eyes water and his head ache. Through the tear, he could see something that was not space. It was not darkness either. It was nothing, pure nothing. The empty potential that had existed before the universe had rules. The planets near the wound were breaking apart. Chunks of rock and ice floated toward the tear, and simply stopped existing when they touched it. No explosion. No flash of light. They just ceased to be. 17 ships tried to approach the wound, Captain Hughes said. He stood beside Jake, his face pale. Ships from 8 different species. All of them were destroyed. Their matter was unmade, broken down into something our instruments cannot measure. The old reality does not understand the new, Queen Velthara said. She had joined them on the observation deck, her scales a worried shade of gray. It cannot touch what we have built except to destroy it. That is why the wounds are so dangerous. If enough of them open, there will be nothing left. Jake felt the fragment inside him reaching toward the wound. It was like a child reaching for its mother. The pull was strong, almost painful. I need to get closer, he said. Captain Hughes shook his head. That is suicide? You saw what happened to those ships. The ships did not have what I have. Jake touched his chest. The Queen said, I carry a piece of the old reality. That is why I can feel the wound. That is why it calls to me. I think that is also why it will not destroy me. The oldest of the Kathrani scholars spoke up. The Harbinger may be correct. The fragment he carries should match the energy of the wound. It may allow him to pass where others cannot. And if you are wrong, Captain Hughes demanded, then we are no worse off than before. The wound will still grow. The universe will still unravel. The old scholar's scales flickered with something that might have been sadness. At least this way, there is hope. The decision was made to send a small shuttle toward the wound. Jake would go alone, but Claire refused to stay behind. You need someone to keep you grounded, she said. Someone to remind you who you are. The scholar said the power can change you, make you forget your humanity. I will not let that happen. Jake wanted to argue. He wanted to protect her from the danger, but he also knew she was right. The thing inside him was growing stronger every hour. He could feel it changing how he thought, how he saw the world. He needed Claire to keep him human. They boarded the shuttle together. The other ships in the area, vessels from 8 different species, pulled back to give them room. Jake could feel the crews watching through their sensors, holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. The shuttle moved toward the wound. Jake sat in the pilot's seat, but he did not really need to fly. The fragment inside him guided the ship, pulling it forward like a compass pointing north. How do you feel? Claire asked. Strange. Like I am becoming something else. Jake looked at his hands. They seemed normal, but he could sense something beneath the skin. Power. Ancient power that had existed before the stars were born. The fragment is showing me things. Memories that are not mine. I can see the war the Queen talked about. I can see the beings who fought it. What were they like? Huge. Not physically, but in their minds. They thought in ways we cannot understand. They could reshape reality just by wanting it to be different. Jake shuddered. And they hated each other. Their hate was so strong, it broke everything. The shuttle crossed a boundary that Jake could feel but not see. Reality became thin here, stretched like old cloth. The stars outside the window flickered and changed colors. Time itself seemed to slow down and speed up at random. We are inside the wound's influence, Claire said. Her voice was shaking. The instruments are going crazy. Nothing makes sense. Hold on to me, Jake said. Do not let go, no matter what happens. He reached out with the fragment, not with his hands, but with that other sense he had been developing. He touched the edges of the wound. It was like pressing his fingers against a tear in fabric, feeling where the threads had pulled apart. And then he understood what he had to do. I need to sew it shut, he said. Like fixing a rip in a shirt. But the needle is me. My consciousness. My connection to both the old reality and the new. Can you do that? I do not know, but I have to try. Jake closed his eyes and let the fragment take over. He felt himself dissolving, spreading out, becoming part of the wound itself. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. It was like being torn apart atom by atom and put back together in the wrong order. But he held on. He remembered who he was. Jake Morrison. A pilot, a human, a man who grew up on a farm in Ohio and liked the smell of rain on fresh soil. He held on to those memories like anchors while the rest of him worked to close the tear. The wound fought back. The old reality did not want to be contained. It pushed against him, tried to consume him, tried to make him part of itself. Jake felt his identity slipping away, felt himself becoming something vast and empty and hungry. Claire's voice cut through the chaos. Jake, stay with me. Remember who you are. Her words were a lifeline. He grabbed onto them, pulled himself back from the edge of dissolution. He remembered her face, her smile, the way she rolled her eyes when he made bad jokes. He remembered Earth, blue and green and beautiful. He remembered why he was doing this, not for power, not for glory, but to save the people and places he loved, with a final effort that felt like it would tear him in half. Jake pulled the edges of the wound together. The threads of reality connected. The tear sealed itself. The bleeding stopped. Jake collapsed in his seat, gasping for breath. Every part of him ached. He felt empty, drained, like he had poured everything he had into that one act. Claire was holding his hand so tight it hurt. Tears were running down her face. You did it. Jake, you did it. He looked out the window. The wound was gone. The Kepler 442 system was still damaged. The planet still broken, but the unraveling had stopped. Where the tear had been, there was now only empty space and a faint shimmer that was not quite light. It worked, Jake whispered. The shuttle emerged from the affected area. The ships of 8 different species surrounded them, their crews cheering and celebrating over the communication channels. Jake barely heard them. He was too tired, too overwhelmed by what he had just done. But even through the exhaustion, he felt something else. A sense of purpose. An understanding of what he was meant to do. There were more wounds out there. Many more. The vision he had received inside the tear had shown him. Dozens of tears scattered across the galaxy. Some small, some large, all slowly growing. All threatening to destroy everything. This is just the beginning, he said to Claire. There are others I need to close. Other places where reality is falling apart. She squeezed his hand. Then we will find them, together. Jake looked at the stars outside the window. They seemed different now. More fragile. More precious. He understood how close everything was to ending. How thin the barrier was between existence and nothing. But he also understood that he had the power to protect it. The power to mend what was broken. The power to save the universe. A farm boy from Ohio had just closed a wound in reality. And he was going to close every single one that remained. The alien queen pointed at me, and the universe began falling apart. Part forward of what happened at Kepler 442 spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Every species with access to long-range communication heard the story. The human who closed the unclosable wound. The harbinger who proved the ancient legends were true. Jake Morrison became famous overnight. His image shone on screens across 1,000 worlds. But Jake did not care about fame. He cared about what he had seen inside the wound. There are others like me, he told a council of representatives from almost 50 different species. They had gathered on a huge Kethrani world ship, a vessel so large it could hold millions of beings. Not many, but they exist. Other individuals carrying fragments of the old reality. They are hidden in different species, scattered across dozens of worlds. Queen Velthara nodded, her scales showing the blue of confirmed truth. We have suspected this for a long time, but until now, we had no way to find them. I can find them, Jake said. When I was inside the wound, I felt their presence. Distant echoes, like voices calling from far away. They are waking up just like I did. The wounds are calling to them. The council argued for hours. Some species wanted to find these other harbingers immediately and bring them together. Others were worried about what might happen if too many fragments of the old reality gathered in one place. A few suggested that the harbingers might be dangerous and should be killed before they could cause problems. Jake listened to all of it. Then he made his own plans. Over the next 2 years, the S-Dauntless became the center of the largest cooperative mission in galactic history. Ships from dozens of species joined Jake's search, providing help and resources as he tracked down one harbinger after another. He found a Vreth hive mind whose fragment gave them the ability to see probability itself. They could look at any situation and know all the possible outcomes. He found a Yumnari cloud being who could control the basic forces of nature, bending gravity and energy to their will. He found a Krendathi, one of the slow-moving rock creatures, who had known about their fragment for millions of years and had been waiting patiently for someone like Jake to appear. Each harbinger was different. Each fragment granted different powers, but they all shared the same purpose: to mend the wounds in reality before everything fell apart. Claire stayed by Jake's side through all of it. She learned to work with each new harbinger, understanding their species and helping them adjust to their awakening powers. She reminded Jake to eat when he forgot. She made him sleep when he pushed himself too hard. She kept him human when the power inside him threatened to change him into something else. "You are doing something incredible," she told him one night. They sat in the observation lounge of the Dauntless, watching stars drift past the windows. Building this alliance, bringing all these different beings together. "I am just doing what needs to be done," Jake said. "That is exactly what makes it incredible. You did not ask for this power. You did not want this responsibility. But you accepted it anyway, because you knew it was the right thing to do." She took his hand. "That is very human of you." Jake smiled, but the smile faded quickly. "Something is wrong. I can feel it. Not just the wounds we already know about. Something else. Something bigger." Claire looked worried. "What do you mean?" "I do not know yet. But it is coming." The attack came 3 weeks later. Jake and a team of harbingers were on a remote planet in the Outer Rim, closing a small wound that had opened in the atmosphere. The work was almost done when ships appeared in orbit. Kathrani ships, but not friendly ones. "We are the servants of the void," a voice said over the communication system. "We have come to stop your foolish efforts to preserve what should be destroyed." The attack was sudden and brutal. Energy weapons struck the ground around Jake's team. Buildings collapsed. Fires erupted. The wound they had been trying to close tore open again, wider than before. "They are traditionalists," Queen Velthara said over the communication link. She had stayed on the world ship in orbit. "A cult that believes the wounds should not be mended. They think the unraveling is the natural order of things." "That is insane," Claire shouted. "If the wounds are not closed, everyone dies, including them. They believe death is preferable to the false reality we have built. They want to return to the old ways, even if it means the end of everything." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Anger and something else. The fragment inside him was responding to the threat, building power, preparing to fight. He tried to control it, to stay calm, but it was hard. Then he saw their leader. A figure walked through the smoke and fire. It was shaped like a human, but wrong somehow. Its body flickered and shifted, never quite solid. Its eyes glowed with the same impossible color Jake had seen in Queen Velthar's scales that first day. "Another harbinger," Jake said. "Yes." The figure's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Like you, I carry a fragment of the old reality. Unlike you, I understand what that truly means." "What are you talking about?" "The old ones did not fail because they lost their war. They failed because they tried to save what could not be saved. Reality is broken, Morrison. It was always broken. The only honest thing to do is let it end." The Dark Harbinger attacked. Power crashed against power. Old reality against old reality. The ground shook. The sky turned strange colors. The wound in the atmosphere grew larger, feeding on the energy of their battle. Jake felt himself being pushed back. The other harbinger was strong, maybe stronger than him. They had embraced the destructive side of their fragment, given themselves over to the chaos and emptiness of the old reality. They did not hold back like Jake did. They did not try to stay human. "You cannot win," the Dark Harbinger said. "You are holding on to something that does not exist. Your humanity, your connections, your precious relationships. They are all illusions, temporary patterns in a doomed reality." Jake fell to his knees. He was losing. The fragment inside him was being overpowered, consumed by its darker twin. He could feel himself starting to dissolve, to become part of the nothing that the Dark Harbinger wanted everything to become. Then Claire was there. She threw herself between Jake and the attack, even though she had no power to protect herself. She had no fragment, no special abilities. She was just a human woman with more courage than sense. "Stop!" She screamed at the Dark Harbinger. "You say reality is broken and worthless. But look at what you are trying to destroy. People who love each other. People who hope and dream and build. Is that really so terrible? Is that really something that deserves to end?" The Dark Harbinger hesitated. Just for a moment. A flicker of something human passed across their distorted face. And in that moment, Jake understood. He reached out, not with destructive power, but with something else. He touched the fragment inside his enemy and showed it what Claire had shown him. The beauty of existence. The value of connection. The simple miracle of being alive in a universe that should not exist but did anyway. He showed them Earth, green hills and blue oceans, children laughing, families gathering, the smell of rain and the warmth of sunlight. He showed them the Kathrani, dancing in their ancient halls, the Vreth, building their hive cities with perfect precision, the Yemnari, dreaming their cloud dreams. Every species, every world, every living thing that would be lost if the wounds consumed everything. "Maybe the old ones failed," Jake said. "Maybe reality is broken. But that does not mean it is worthless. Humans have always been good at making beautiful things from broken pieces. We have always been good at finding hope in hopeless situations." The Dark Harbinger fell to their knees. The power that had been consuming them faded. The flickering stopped, and what was left was just a person. A tired, confused, broken person who had forgotten why life was worth living. "I forgot," they whispered. "I forgot there was anything worth saving." Jake helped them stand. That is the danger of the power we carry. It can make us forget. It can make us see only the cracks and not the light shining through them. That is why we need each other. To remind us. To keep us human. The battle was over. The cult of the servants of the void scattered, their leader defeated. The wound in the atmosphere was closed, sealed by the combined power of the harbingers working together. But Jake knew this was not the end. The Dark Harbinger had spoken of something bigger, something that the wounds were all connected to. An original tear, the first wound, the source of all the others. If they did not find it and close it, all their work would mean nothing. The universe would still unravel. everything would still end. Jake looked at Claire, at his team of harbingers, at the stars overhead. We need to find the source, he said. The original wound. The one that started all of this. Claire nodded. Then we will find it. Together. Together. That was the key. Not power alone, but connection. Not strength alone, but love. That was what humans brought to the universe. That was what would save it. Jake Morrison was certain of that. The alien queen pointed at me, and the universe began falling apart. Part 5-4. Years had passed since Queen Velthara pointed at Jake Morrison in the coronation hall. In that time, he had traveled to every corner of the galaxy. He had found 43 harbingers from 19 different species. He had closed hundreds of wounds. And still, the unraveling continued. The problem was simple and terrible. All the wounds they had mended were just symptoms. Somewhere out there was the original wound, the first tear made during the ancient war. It was growing stronger every day, and until it was closed, new wounds would keep appearing faster than they could be healed. We have found it, Queen Velthara announced. The council chamber on the Kothrani worldship fell silent. Hundreds of representatives from dozens of species waited to hear what the queen would say next. She activated a holographic display. It showed a region of space that looked completely empty. No stars, no planets, no light of any kind. Just a vast darkness that stretched across thousands of light years. The wound is there, Jake said. He could feel it even from this distance, pulling at the fragment inside him. It is huge. Bigger than anything we have closed before. If that wound is as large as our sensors suggest, said Admiral Owen Hughes, who had been promoted several times since the journey began. Closing it would take more power than all the harbingers combined. It would take more than that, Jake agreed. He had been thinking about this for months, preparing himself, coming to terms with what would be needed. It would take something that has never been tried before. He looked around the chamber at the other harbingers. Beings from a dozen different worlds, each carrying their own fragment of the old reality. Some were friends now. Some he barely knew. But all of them shared the same purpose, the same calling. We need to merge, Jake said. All of us. Combine our fragments into a single consciousness. Only then will we have enough power to close the original wound. The reaction was immediate. Some harbingers nodded, understanding the need. Others backed away, fear in their eyes. The idea of giving up their individual identity, becoming part of something else, was terrifying. What happens to us if we merge? Asked the Vreth Harbinger, their mandibles clicking nervously. I do not know for certain, Jake admitted. We might be able to separate again after the wound is closed. Or we might become something new. Something permanent? You are asking us to die, said another harbinger. I am asking you to become more than you are. To give yourselves to something larger. Yes, it is a sacrifice. The biggest sacrifice anyone could make. But if we do not do this, everyone dies anyway. Not just us, everyone, everything, the entire universe, gone. The debate lasted for days. Some harbingers agreed immediately. Others refused and left, unwilling to give up their existence, even to save everything else. In the end, 31 of the 43 remained, 31 beings from 15 species, willing to sacrifice themselves for a universe that most of them had only recently learned existed. Claire found Jake in his quarters the night before the final mission. He was sitting by the window, watching the stars. You know what this means, she said. If you merge with the others, you might not come back. Jake Morrison might stop existing. I know. And you are still going to do it? I have to. It is what I was made for. What all of us were made for. He took her hands in his. But I needed to tell you something first. These 4 years, traveling with you, fighting beside you, building something impossible together, they have been the best years of my life. You kept me human when everything else was trying to change me. You showed me why the universe was worth saving. Claire's eyes filled with tears. You idiot. You wait until the last minute to tell me this. I did not want to make things complicated. There was always another crisis, another wound to close. And now there is the final crisis. And you finally decide to be honest. She kissed him, long and desperate and full of everything they had never said to each other. The fleet of the Alliance approached the darkness. Ships from every major species, thousands of vessels carrying countless souls, all of them coming to witness the end of the beginning, or the beginning of the end. The harbingers gathered in a great chamber aboard the world ship. 31 individuals from 15 different worlds, standing in a circle, preparing to become one. Jake stood at the center. I will not lie to you, he said. I do not know if this will work. I do not know what we will become. But I know why we are doing it. Not because some ancient prophecy demands it. Not because we have no choice. But because the universe, with all its flaws and wounds and problems, is worth saving. Because every star and planet and living creature deserves a chance to exist. He looked at each harbinger in turn. The Vreth, who could see probability. The Yemnari, who controlled fundamental forces. The Krendathi, who had waited millions of years for this moment. All of them, from worlds so different they should have been enemies, united by a common purpose. Thank you, Jake said, for believing, for trying, for being here. The merging began. It was not painful, exactly. It was more like drowning in an ocean of other minds. Jake felt himself spreading thin, his individual thoughts mixing with dozens of others. He saw through eyes that were not his own. He felt emotions from beings whose species had evolved in completely different ways. But he held on. He kept a piece of himself separate, anchored to his memories of Claire, of Earth, of who he had been before all of this started. He was the guide, the center, the one who would steer the merged consciousness toward its goal. They became something new. Not a person, not a group, something between. A being made of 31 fragments of the old reality, powerful enough to reshape existence itself. They approached the original wound. It was even larger than Jake had imagined. A tear in reality that stretched back to the very beginning of time. Through it, they could see the war that had broken everything. They could see the beings who had fought it, creatures so vast and strange that even the merged consciousness could barely understand them. They could see the sacrifice those beings had made. They had not just repaired reality. They had given their own existence to become the foundation of the new universe. Their minds, their essence, had been woven into the fabric of everything that existed. And when they died, they left pieces of themselves behind. The fragments. The things the harbingers carried, the merged consciousness understood. To close this wound, they had to do what the old ones had done. They had to become part of reality itself. They had to weave themselves into the fabric of existence and hold it together forever. It would mean the end of Jake Morrison. The end of all the individual harbingers. The end of everything they had been. But it would also mean saving everything else. The merged consciousness reached out and touched the edges of the wound. Reality shook. Stars flickered. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, with an effort that went beyond anything physical, they began to close the tear. Jake felt himself stretching, becoming thin, spreading across the entire universe. He felt Claire's love, even from so far away. He felt the hope of every being who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. He felt the weight of everything that existed, resting on his shoulders. The wound closed. The original tier sealed itself for the first time since the universe began. Reality became stable in a way it had never been before, and Jake Morrison became something else. Not dead, not gone, but no longer separate from the cosmos he had saved. His consciousness merged with the fabric of existence, became a part of everything, everywhere. Always. Claire stood on the observation deck of the Dauntless, watching the stars burn bright and steady. She could feel him out there in the space between spaces. A presence that was everywhere and nowhere, familiar and strange. "You did it," she whispered. "You crazy, wonderful idiot. You actually did it." And somewhere in the depths of the universe, something that had been Jake Morrison smiled. The galaxy rebuilt itself in the years that followed. The alliance that had formed to save reality became a permanent coalition. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years learned to work together. They called themselves the Mended, in honor of what had been achieved. On Earth, in a small town in Ohio, a statue was built in the town square. It showed a young man in a pilot's uniform, looking up at the stars with wonder in his eyes. The words on the base said, "Jake Morrison." He saw the wounds in reality, and he chose to heal them. He saw the darkness at the end of everything, and he became the light. Children grew up hearing stories about the human who saved the universe. Some of them dreamed of traveling to the stars themselves. And in those dreams, they sometimes felt a presence watching over them. Something warm and hopeful and endlessly stubborn. The universe had nearly fallen apart, but a human had held it together. A simple man from a simple place who had been given an impossible task and had refused to fail. That was the human way. That was what made humanity special. Not strength or intelligence or technology, but the simple, stubborn belief that things could get better, that broken things could be fixed. That hope was never wasted. Jake Morrison was gone, and he was everywhere. The universe was mended, and it would never fall apart again. This was his gift to existence. This was the legacy of humanity. The end.